Well, hello from him and hello from me. Today I want to look at some more things around Farley, and I want to look at in particular, oh God, got me on the second go, thanks very much. I want to look at in particular what we call fishtail Farley and the genius of that and how we use it and what it's used for. And that'll link into looking at some other different kinds of postures and discussions. I want to begin by talking about, well, I've seen a couple of things online. How to phrase this? So I've seen something online where, sometimes you have an idea that it happens to me all the time. It happens to me in my professional work because I have to teach professionally. I don't have to. I enjoy teaching professionally, not wushu, in the academic world. And sometimes there's ideas that even though they're quite simple ideas, I always find them really difficult to get across. And I think I've been having this with this idea of Farley and this idea of like bracing the posture as opposed to lifting your back leg. And a couple of times now I've talked about people throwing a javelin, and I still feel like I haven't got the idea across. And then sometimes you just see something, and it's like, all right, okay, that's the thing that I'm trying to get across. And very often it's seeing someone do something wrong, and you think, all right, okay, that just crystallises it in my mind that people are doing that, so I can talk about that and just help to explain the concept in that way. So there's, I don't want to name people. I mean, like my feelings about many of the online Yiquan people, and particularly the way that they speak to or speak down to people who are just interested in Yiquan or beginners, or indeed anyone. I have my issues with, but regardless of that, I don't want to say who this person is, but it's someone who's got like quite a significant following talking about Yiquan and Chinese martial arts. The issue isn't the following. I think everyone knows it doesn't matter to me. Like, I appreciate anyone who's got any kind of interest in what I'm doing. What's important to me is that tens of thousands of people are like seeing the wrong thing and being misled. And we can say in this case, well, the theory is solid. So when I explain it in a moment, what I'm talking about, we can see that when it's done wrong, you can explain why it's done wrong. When it's done right, you can explain why it's done right. But you can also see that this person is trained with, you've got to be very careful about these terms, he's trained with Yao Cheng Guang, and you can see that Yao Cheng Guang does it right. He doesn't do it like this person does this posture. This is a bit of a waffle, isn't it? So what I'm talking about is the idea of pushing someone like this, and there are different ways of doing this. And I want to use this to kind of crystallise a discussion around Farley, but also to get this point across from this kind of starting point of thinking about what this lad is doing. And what he's doing is he's pushing someone. So it comes into this category of, for some people, Farley is just anything, and like literally, it could just be anything that involves force, because that's literally what it means. It doesn't literally mean like it's got to be any particular kind of force, like it's got to be explosive or something like that. But it idiomatically means explosive force. That's how we use it in Yiquan, to mean that idea of explosive force. So there's different kinds of force and ways of using force, and this comes back to this idea of like throwing a javelin, because this is what he does. And also, I suppose the other thing I wanted to say was, like, Yao Cheng Guang himself says, like, even amongst his own students, like, only like 2 or 3 really get it. So just because someone's trained with Yao Cheng Guang or a famous teacher, it doesn't make any difference. If what they're doing is demonstrably wrong, it's wrong, So sometimes I think people are more interested in buying into belonging to something, which I think is very closely linked to feelings of, like in a society that makes you feel like you have no worth, and then people like seeing that wushu has worth and wanting to buy into it, but buying into it in the wrong way. It's not about lineage, it's about your personal development. Anyway, this lad, he pushes his mate, and of course there's no, like, it's not Farley. Like, Farley's got to mean something, so it's not short, sharp force. It's just, he does this where he lifts his leg up and he pushes like that. And this is what I've talked about before. We call it rolling the limb. So you roll on the limb like that. this kind of push like that. And this is what you do when you throw a javelin. You throw the javelin and you roll on the limb in that way. And it's because you want to push and get the energy in a different way when you throw a javelin. And that's very different to the kind of force that we want in each one when we want to hit someone. And the easiest way to think about this, and I was doing this myself the other day in the gym, is to get a reasonably heavy medicine ball and to throw it at the wall like that. And if you want to throw it high and far like that, you come up off your back foot like that and you throw it, and you want all the energy to go in a big thing like that. Whereas if you do it like the way that you should do it, like with the short, sharp movement of the body, and you get the medicine ball and do that, the medicine ball will just go like that. So you can see that like these are totally different kinds of force transmission, and that when someone wants to get a big dramatic effect like pushing someone back, that they're going to do that, like you're hurling the medicine ball. But by the same token, if you push someone back like that, you don't really hurt them. But if you like that, you hit them really hard with short, sharp force in the chest, then you really hurt them. So even though that's the same energy as the medicine ball just going like that, it has far more more impact and what we call shock force. And that's a bit of it's unavoidable in Chinese martial arts that certain terms are going to cause us to appoint overblown expectations, and the idea of shock force is one of those things. But nevertheless, if someone hits you with that kind of force fast in the chest rather than pushing you with their knuckles, so this also makes a difference, like impact point to impact point, knuckles right in the ribs, that is really, really painful, and it really, really hurts, and it can really do some damage. And even if you just, I do this exercise myself, and anyone who's doing like kind of fight training, do this thing with a medicine ball where you're hitting yourself with a medicine ball, or someone's hitting you and you hit it on the chest, and you can feel like, even just with like, let's say a 5 kg medicine ball into the chest, you can feel how easy it is to, and then when you come sparring and someone punches you in the chest with gloves on, you get used to it, but you feel the force, and that if someone just does it bare knuckle, how painful and dramatic that will be. So that kind of use of shock force, what we call shock force, that I'm going to explain a little bit more in a moment, that's really effective, and it doesn't really matter that the medicine ball would just drop like that, because it's a different kind of force, it's a different kind of law of physics that involves other things like the impact, the surface that we're impacting with, like a hard surface like the knuckles, and the way that we're releasing force, and the target that we're hitting, and the kind of energy that we want to put in it. So this lad does it like that, and the first thing to say about that is that Yao Chen Guang doesn't do it like that, so he can't have learned that from Yao Chen Guang. And there's very good reasons for this. So Yao Chen Guang does it a couple of ways, and there's a couple of standard ways of doing it in each one anyway. And I've talked about this before, and one is where you do it without the scrape routine, or some people call it rubbing. You do it without the scrape routine, and we do what we call frog's legging, where both the legs go out like that, and you'll see that. And that's a legitimate. Remember that I've said multiple times that within the structural movement paradigm, there's usually multiple different ways of doing things. It's not a question of is this right or is this wrong? It's a question of, does this conform to our quintessence movements, principal movements of wushu first? So, for example, doing it like that doesn't, because it's not Farley, it's not this kind of use of structural short, sharp force. So doing that doesn't. And then if it does, out of the different moves that do, like frog's legging it like that, or just doing it with the foot like that, which one is the most powerful? And this is more powerful because it gets a little bit more energy on the movement, with the body movement, the body weight going forward. And as we'll talk about in a moment, it comes to this point of solidifying the posture when the foot hits the floor. That's very much what we're going to talk about today. You can then say, so we've got two different ways of doing it. One's maybe more powerful than the other, and also it's more directional. So when you frog's leg it like that, you've got a lot more energy going out to the side like that. And when you do it that way, more of your energy is going forward, and that also adds power into the movement. So scientifically, you can say one is more powerful than the other, and even though like not many people can do this, nevertheless the people who can do it, like me, can actually get in front of a heavy bag and do it and demonstrate it with real power and real force, and also on a person without the other person needing to throw themselves backwards, like I've got magic powers. So we can scientifically demonstrate that. But we can then also say, well, okay, remember that our overall idea is the reality of the context of the fight. So it might be that in a particular, if we've got to make a decision between two ways of doing things, that one way might be more useful in a fight than another. So I mean, it could be anything. So with this, it's difficult to say, you know, is this more useful than this? Probably doesn't make that much difference, so we can just go with, well, one's more powerful than another. But there might be another consideration with another posture where we say, well, I suppose the simplest example will be the argument between, should you have an active guard like this, or should you have a guard like this that can just be hit into bare knuckle, or is it better in an actual fight which is going to be over quickly and you don't want to really take any hits at all, to have this kind of active guard that's around you? That's an argument you can have and a discussion you can have. And the answer may well be like, as in that case, that there isn't a single answer, that you need to be able to change it, use different kinds of guard and be able to punch from different angles, but keeping the same movement principle. So there's sophisticated coaching arguments to be had about the fight training aspects of the movement. But in this case, we can say, well, let's say we'll go with this. We've decided that the straight routing is the most powerful way of doing it, and then we contrast that with this way of doing it, where the leg comes right up off the floor. And we can say, right, well, look at the difference in this. When you roll on your limb like that, all your weight comes forward like that for a start. So, and you're on one leg. So not only have you not got the shock force, which we'll come back to that in a moment, but you're like this. And one of the things that people do when they're pushed is grab onto you, and I think this just comes from people not doing any sparring. Like each one isn't really practical; it's all kind of theoretical. You've got to bring it into sparring. When you start doing things like that and you start pushing people like that, the first thing they do, usually they are grabbing onto you if they're that close. Anyway, they're coming in pretty close. And as I've said before, it's quite hard to get this posture in anyway. This double push like that. It's really difficult. It's just, as I said before, like you see it all the time in each one. Yeah, actually, it's one of the hardest things to do when you're actually sparring. Once you take away this really artificial way of doing push hands, where people are really stiff, and then they just hold their arms really stiff so that you can move them, and then they just stand there like that, like a robot, so that you can release force and push them. Like as soon as you start not thinking like, oh, he's a really famous master, so I'm not going to let him do that. If you start thinking like that, then all of a sudden, even those famous masters are going to have a lot of difficulty trying to get that posture to work. Those demonstrations that we see, okay, they're good technical demonstrations, but against people who are genuinely resisting and not like letting you do that, it becomes much more difficult. And what you've got to do instead is, like, as you can see when I'm sparring, like you've got to pick out your moments where someone's off balance, and then you've just got to go really fast. And very often it's not two hands on the chest, it's like a hand on the shoulder, hand on the side of the body or something like that. There's loads of different, or onto the guard or something, and pick out the moments. It's nowhere near that easy. Anyway, when you push like this, obviously then you're leaning up like this and people grab onto you, and the first thing that happens is you just pulled off balance immediately. And it doesn't necessarily give you any advantage whatsoever, other than these, like, he pushes this lad and this lad goes flying back, and I just think, well, did he not have his breakfast that morning or something, like, because, yeah, it happens, like, usually not straight back like that, because it's your strongest axis, so I'm always very wary of that. To push someone like that's quite easy, and there's videos of me doing it when I'm sparring, just hit right and people go flying. And with more shocking force, if you are really just catch them right on the right axis when they're off balance, yeah, you can push them back like that. But this didn't look very convincing to me, and in most cases anyway. It's like in push hands, like, okay, you go like that and you push me back like that, so what? You're just pushing me back into kicking range, which I'd rather be there anyway, because Kicks are my main thing, so kicks are my main weapon. So yeah, just put me back in a kicking range. What difference does that make to me? It's just range control. You haven't given up range control just by pushing me back. You've got to push and do something, you know, into the punch or something like that. So it's also one of the reasons why I don't see the point in fixed step push hands. I just don't see what skill it develops, because what you want is footwork. It starts making you think there's some magic in your arms that can balance you. She's just, why would anyone think that? Anyway, so someone's going to pull you right off balance like that if you do that. And it's like, there's loads of videos there where, you know, the fight starter push where people go like that, and people's hands come up like that. And if they've got anything about them, their hands come up and they grab onto the other person. It's wrong. And you can compare that with the straight rooting, where instead of being up like that and rolling on the limb, you sink the roots like that, or what we used to call sinking the chi in the old days, like that. You sink and everything sinks down like that into a more solid, or even if you don't do it like with the straight root, everything sinks down. So you actually become much more difficult to pull forward, even if they do grab onto your arms. That of course is exactly how Yiquan does it. There's countless videos of him doing it like that. Now, of course, all of these things are over-determined. The posture is over-determined. And remember, that means that there's multiple different reasons why we do it, not just one. So it's changing our way of thinking. Like, too often in Chinese martial arts, people are looking for either a single answer or answers that are like really, really simple, and very often like there's multiple different answers, and also those different answers can be perceived on different levels depending on the level of your physical body knowledge, what we call the system being gamified, that you unlock that understanding. So one of the things that's going on here that's quite important when we do this posture, and one of the reasons why we don't really want to frog leg it like that, is this. And you hear that, and what you're hearing there is my heel hitting the floor. And that's what we call setting the configuration. So we know this key idea of configuration, that if let's say my target is over here and I want to kind of hammer fist hit this way, but now my target is down here, what am I going to hit it with? I'm going to punch it, that's this way. I mean, maybe I want a knee like that. You know, usually obviously put our foot down with rather than trying to hold the configuration like that. But let's say I'm here and I want to elbow back this way. Like the most likely configuration seems to be to hit with the elbow that way, but you know, let's say I can't, or that's not the right move, or I just with the corner of my eye see the target moving out of range of this elbow and moving around this way, so I change to configuration this way. And none of these are techniques, so they're techniques, but they're quintessence movement skills. Like, they're not specific techniques. Like, you know, I wouldn't normally practice this, and I wouldn't normally practice something like that. They're quite odd, or hitting down here or something like that. The quintessence movement skills that we've developed allow us to form into these configurations. Wang Xingjai calls this Taolu. So usually Taolu means forms. Like Shaolin Chuan. You know what forms are. And he takes this idea of Taolu, like this is what he always does with concepts, like he does with Qi, like he does with the harmonies in Xing Yi Chuan. Usually doesn't abolish concepts, he has this kind of Confucian way of reinterpreting old concepts in new ways so that you keep what's valuable from the past. Nevertheless, this is how Wang Xingjai sees it, that with quintessence movement skills, you form into a form, Taolu, and he uses this word Taolu, a particular form. It just exists for one moment. And because we've got quintessence movement skills, it doesn't matter what the posture is, where the target is, we've developed the ability to hit it with force. I'm having a lovely cup of Chinese tea. My senior student brought this back from the wushu shop in Singapore. Didn't specify which wushu shop, and I've used far too much tea in it, I'll be buzzing. But shout out to all the wushu shops of Singapore. Thank you for your service. I need it because it's so cold. And we've also talked about the idea that, you know, a configuration isn't just the lock point, it's the whole flow into the movement, and within, as we're moving and then forming the configuration, it could just be a punch like that, the flow into the moment, but then there's the lock point where the configuration locks in a particular way, whichever way it is, to transmit force. And this is the art that we're developing, to understand intuitively what's the point where we hit, how should the configuration be to hit in a certain way, and then to be able to do that intuitively in the moment. And we call that the lock point, and when that hits, we call it the contact point. So we transmit force from a particular point or points. But the next key thing that I've been building or alluding to along the way is the idea that the configuration sets. I've introduced it step by step, because you've got to be really careful with this idea, because it's very misleading to say that, like Zhao Daoxin says, like just for a split second, everything just tenses. Like a split second's quite an indeterminate amount of time, and if you don't understand, if you can't do it physically, it's very easy to start appointing expectation. Well, how tense should I be? You know, should I be really tense like that? But nevertheless, we've been alluding to this idea of how we do it. I started talking about this kind of bracing route in the past 2 or 3 videos where you hit down, and I've started explaining how sometimes you'll hear the root like that, like the ball of the foot hitting the floor, or this way, the heel hitting the floor. And this is what we call setting the configuration. And then, just like a jelly setting, like, or you know, the lock point is the point where everything just, I'm going to say tenses for now, tenses for a split second, to solidify the structure so that the power that's generated can be transmitted through the structure. Just in the same way that, like, if a wire is very, very taut and you can just ping it like that and it'll go all the way down the wire, but if the wire is very loose and you go like that, well, the energy just dies here. It doesn't go to the end of the wire. We want the energy to go to the power that we generate to go all the way through the body, everything that's generated from the body, to go into the hit point. And to do that, we have to set it. And that means that it's, one of the things it means is that everything's just got to tense a little bit in that moment. But that's not enough, because even if we tense, it's possible for a lot of the force to be dissipated. So what we want, one of the things that we want to do is this idea of rooting. And remember, I've talked about that it's very much misunderstood. So this sound that you hear when that happens, that's the posture setting, that it becomes just like in that split second, totally solidified. And as you kind of release force into the ground, the reactive force pushes back up, and everything is just transmitted, because the body becomes like a really solid structure, and everything is transmitted to the contact point. And I was just reading, it was Yang Cheng Fu talking about the idea that power begins in the foot and it's transmitted up through the leg into the waist, and then to the contact point. And I thought that's quite an interesting idea, because that's how people thought about it in the old days. And I'm going to criticise that and say it's not quite right. And Wang Xinjai also got this, that it's not quite right. So, but nevertheless, you still see people making this mistake, particularly when they try and do it in Yourself Yiquan, where they do a foot movement like that with this kind of pivot routing, where what they try to do is issue force from the leg out like that. And the first thing to say about that is that is not how you issue force from the leg. I mean, you can, like if there's a football, you could just do something like that. Or if you wanted to hit him with the knee, you could do it that way. But really, if you want to issue force out like that, we use this kind of flap like that, which looks like nothing, but it's really useful for, let's say someone's legs there and you're kind of wrestling a bit, and you can pull them like that and just knock their leg right out like that. That's a bit of an exaggerated thing, isn't it? Knock their leg right out. You can just shift their leg a bit like that with the. But some people think like, well, so it's easy to think like that. Well, if I do this with my foot, I generate power. Like there's clearly some kind of energy here, and I want to transmit that power like this is like an electric generator or something, and by doing that it generates force. That force in the leg somehow has got to be transmitted up into the body and into the punch, like that. So then you start thinking, well, I do it like that then, do it like that, because it's transmitting force in some way. And then there's maybe some kind of vague idea that, well, you're moving the whole body in your rotational Farley, but it's very much the same thing when we use what we call fishtail Farley, which is what I'm going to introduce now and use that to talk about this idea of setting the configuration. A fishtail Farley is when it's as simple as this, the heel just comes out like that, usually not in like that. There's times you can use it, but it's an odd one, so we'll talk about that another time. But usually for fishtail Farley, the heel just comes out like that, and it's different from the pivot root because your foot doesn't come up like that, it just keeps flat like that. And it's more of an advanced skill, not least because you've got to be able to keep the foot flat and not roll over on your ankle and also release force. So I'll just do it on its own first, so like that. And I'm exaggerating the heel hitting the floor there so you can hear what I'm going to talk about in a posture setting. Usually it's a little bit less like that. And you can do it just from the battling. This isn't usually for releasing force from the leg, like as I'm saying, like if you want to hit with the leg, you don't usually do it like that. But it's easy to think then, like, well, this is generating quite a lot of force, so then is what I'm trying to do solidify my structure so that that force that's generated, almost as if it's like a generator generating electricity, is that then passed up into my body and I can use it, for example, to in a punch or something like that. And no, that's not what's happening, but it's very easy to think like that, so you can understand people in the past thinking like the force is generated in the leg and then into the hips and up into the body. The important thing that's happening is nothing to do with that. It's to do with setting the configuration when the heel hits into the floor. And you can think about this really easily. Like if I do that, I'm trying to release force with my other leg. If I do that, and even if I turn it, I can add a bit of force doing it like that. That's not the same as like that. All of a sudden, the force is like 3 or 4 times what it is. Just maybe more than that. I'd have to check it on a machine or something. But I can feel in my whole body. That's far more powerful than just doing like that. So, of course, one of the things that's happening is the foot is turning like that, and that's allowing me to turn my axis more. So this is the idea of the crooked axis. So think about like when a stick is in a pond and you see the reflection going off like that. It's kind of like that the axis is half here and half here. So it's going around like that, or it's doing it flat like that. And that brings us to the next idea, which is like, well, what's this for? This fishtail Farley of which you speak, and it's for being very close range for the most part. So if we think about normal rotational Farley with a punch, and we usually use this big pivot root like that. When we do that, like we lose this kind of very short movement in the pivot root, and we change it for this phased movement like that, which just adds into the stabilisation and facilitation of the correct motion in the body. And most of our Farley, 99.9, is generated from the way that when we've talked about our somatic timing is moving around our axis. Most of it is generated from that posture, and that's not really, it's pushing up a bit and a little bit explosively, but nothing's being generated, nothing's added to it by doing and you also usually find that when people do that, they really over truncate the punch, so they go like that to try and keep it in line with the anyway. So when we do it right though, we don't do that because there's no reason to do that. It doesn't add anything whatsoever to the punch. In fact, it takes away from the movement, because we need a bigger movement around the rotational axis like this to generate the kind of serious power that we need, like the knockout power that we want from a punch. I mean, people can argue about it. Any kind of punch on the nose stings, but like if someone's really mad and they go, they're just going to, someone's really chatting away, they're just going to laugh at that, just going to laugh that off. But we want like proper, big structure, lot like that. But when a movement is closer in, then we haven't got that big rotation on the movement like that. We haven't got a big rotation. We just want to, let's say, so classic example is like I want to hit him with my shoulder, and we usually don't want to do like that because it's just not powerful enough. So the pivot route really just stabilizes, and here's how we know that what I'm saying is true. That when we do it like that, we can see that the pivot route doesn't really add any power in. All the power goes because all of a sudden we've lost the size of the move. Even though like the actual body is moving a very similar amount, we've lost all this extra stuff, all this screwing force, all the big movement of the arms, shoulders fully extending into up to the truncation point. All of that's gone, and all of a sudden it's very hard to. We can do it. I'm compensating by fishtailing just a little bit my back foot. I'm fishtailing my back foot in like that, just imperceptibly. I'll exaggerate it. So we can do it like that by changing to the back foot to compensate. But that just proves the rule. I mean, it proves two things. One, my intuitive ability to use the Yiquan paradigm just adapted immediately. I'm using the pivot route. That's not adding in the force that I need, so my back foot just started doing it instead. But if I don't do it again, so if I just do it like that, you can see this adds nothing. You can feel it in your body that this adds nothing stabilizes the posture a bit, and there's a little bit of pushing up force, but it adds nothing. So we need to compensate for that. And the way that we compensate for that is fishtail routing, just this little bit like that. So one of the things it does is it permits this, but so does that, like that. And one of the things that you can see that doesn't happen so much with a pivot route on the front is setting the posture, but it does, but to a lesser degree. So the ball of the foot is in the. Remember when I talked of changing to this way of doing it on the, this way you set the posture with the ball of the foot like. This is the point where you kick back and kick forward, and all of a sudden the whole posture is set in a line all the way down to the floor. When you do it this way, because there's no kick back like that, there's no lift and push back like that, there's just a push up. So this is about, 20% of the setting power that the back foot has when it does it like that. So it loses that setting power, and that's one of the really important things that is revealed when we do it like that. That's compensated for when we're doing a big punch with the front hand like that. It's compensated for by the overall size of the movement. Now that we're shrinking the movement down into a tiny little movement, that compensation is no longer there. And that's just not setting the posture enough. We want a more solid structure, we want a faster movement. And those two things are given to us by fishtail routing. So one, the crooked axis allows us to turn fast, and the setting is when the heel hits the floor like that. And of course this is the harmony of the foot and the striking surface, our Qi Xin Yiquan principle. Like that. And when it hits like that, that's when we tense, and then the energy of hitting the floor just tenses up the whole, just strengthens up and solidifies and sets the whole movement so that force can be transmitted into the target point. It's nothing really to do with the twisting of the leg. There's no energy being transmitted into my shoulder just by doing that. I've got to use that to add into that, and then as the shoulder hits, the heel hits the floor like that, and then that looks like that. And you can probably see that setting the posture with both legs, and this is one of the really distinctive features of fishtail Fa Li, that intuitively you will try and generate as much force as possible in these short movements. So your body, if your intent has been trained well enough, you'll usually be doing it, you'll be setting the posture with both heels, and that's the sound that you can hear, that my heel is hitting into the floor like that. It's exactly the same as when we do a kick and we do it inwards like that. So I'm contradicting myself, because before I said we hardly ever do that. I didn't think about kicks. When we do it with kicks, we do that all the time, of course. And that's the sound you can hear when you do it with kicks. I've got a video where I'm training in the woods and you can hear it. And I've put on, you can hear good structure. I put in the title, you can hear good structure, and you can hear it. Boji Kong as well, even though he's hardly moving, he's quite elderly and out of shape, but you can really hear the way that the way that he sets the posture, the way that he locks into the configuration. You can hear the sound of his heels hitting the floor. And this is such a useful concept. So it's not just for shoulders. We can use it for loads of different things. But we start with, see, that both will go out a little bit like that. But usually the back one it'll just hit that like that. Usually just hits in like that into the floor. Just sets it like two prongs going into the floor. That just rebounds all the structure through all the power through a solid structure to the hit point. It starts to reveal some mysteries and also just expand some others. So like the idea that you can release force from any part of the body, or that you're releasing force from multiple parts of the body at the same time. Because of course, as I'm doing that, I'm also hitting back with the shoulder. There's also force here, and there's also force from here as well. So these are all kind of interrelated. And it also explains the idea again of empty and full. So when I hit like that, this is full and this is empty, of course. But it also raises this idea of what is it that the intent is doing that makes all the force direct to that hit point. Yeah, it could be this hit point, could be that hit point, could be this. These are all the points really that are just like even if I was just a machine and I had no intent, nevertheless, if the machine did this posture, these are all the points that would be where the energy is strike worthy energy. But somehow you just feel it, like in the moment your intent has got to be directed to you want to hit with that part of the body, and then the intent itself, this magnificent computer program that we've been honing and writing all along and developing this machine so that it can express itself, just knows the right configuration to do it. But to get that, you've got to practice, and it won't just happen. So you've got to practice, first of all, just getting that fishtail and practicing it with different things like that. And once you've got that, then you can start doing some other things from close or medium range as well. So let's say we've looked at this before, where we hit out with the forearm. And remember I said, like, it's different to when you elbow like that, because you open the shoulders like that, rather than pushing around. There's a little bit around the axis, but it's mostly open like the Fa Li is. It's like breaking a rope. That's how you visualize it in traditional training. You're holding a rope and you open it like that. See, I set the posture with my back foot then, so you can start seeing these little things. And also that's one of the mysteries of intent, because a lot of it depends on where was my intent. Like that's more like I'm thinking like hitting back. If I'm thinking of hitting forward like that, see, I set the posture on my front foot. If I'm thinking of hitting back, I set the posture on my back foot like that. So from very close range, like let's say we're guarding up like that. Or we want to hit down like that. And even if like we hit down this way, or even if we hit in this way, it's exactly the same, because this is opening even if we hit like this, and also this is opening even if we hit like, because the chest is opening and both the hips are going that way rather than closing in like that. Whereas if we do it like that, so I can do that like that, or I can do it like that, that's opening, that's closing. That's much more what you see in Shaolin Chuan or karate or something like that. Closing posture. So the hips going close together. And we generate force like this. just like one of those big Shaolin postures like that, one of those demons that you see guarding Buddha or torturing the sinners who perverted Yiquan for their egotistical ends. And the fishtail Farley just comes out and it sets with both feet. So you see both feet move like that, just going out a little bit. And the fishtail Farley just sets the posture. So your basic postures to practice for this are hitting with the shoulder in like that. It starts getting a little bit more complex when we want to go forward a little bit with it, where we've got to combine the straight rooting into a fishtail, but we'll come back to that another time because we don't want to overcomplicate it. We'll just think off the spot at the moment, and we're going to hit more in with the like that with the. We also don't want to complicate it with a step yet, so you can see step by step, escalating basics. We can get that. Get this first. So just practicing very relaxed line, and exactly the same thing from the back line. The only thing with the back one is that we want to lean in more with it like that. It's kind of over-determined because usually we've got a little bit more ground to cover, so we change it into the lean like that. One, we're trying to get closer, this is closer to the target and this is further away, so we lean in a bit. But you can feel when you do it on the back, if you just do it flat like that, as opposed to a lean in, that just gives a little bit of extra zing and distance on it. You can do it like with the lean in the front as well, but do it straight away. You've got to lean in with it like that a little bit, and that's why you generally see the old Yiquan guys do it like that. You've got to get in. So with the back, exactly the same thing. The fishtail Farley just comes out like that. Just comes out, hits like that. So you'll start seeing this effect then that the further the posture out is from the body, the more you could use a pivot root or you could use fishtail Farley. So for like a close range push, like someone's really close and you're in like this and your arms are up and you want to release force this way. And remember, it's not fantasy martial arts. We're not imagining that we're going to ping someone back. We just want to create as much force as we possibly can within that space to change into something else usually. Let's just get someone moving. You can use this very close range, Farley, and similarly if you want to hit down like this way, very close range, like that, like you want to hit someone in the, I don't know, let's say maybe they've got hold of your leg or something and they're absolutely no good at takedowns, but you think, well, I'm going to hammer fist him in there. You can use this kind of fishtail Farley. And if you can't move this leg, you can compensate for it by setting the posture from the other leg. So that's, as I've been alluding to, this is a higher level skill or an intermediate level skill that you can choose with fishtail Farley, usually how you set the posture one way or the other, or indeed both feet. So when I hit like that, I'm going to use the fishtail Farley this way to hit him. I'm saying it's going to kill him, we're just trying to maximise the force that we can get, and we're just saying it's just better than doing that. It's better than doing that. But as the posture moves further out from the body, the more we could change and use pivot routing like that for a posture like that. And the more it comes close in, the more that becomes really awkward, because what we're doing here is open. If we try and use the pivot root like that, everything that we talked about from the punch, you immediately lose all the power from the movement being bigger. So size really does matter. So when we say like small movement is better than big movement, it doesn't mean that it's exactly the same movement. The art of the configuration is understanding how you change your routing to get the power from a smaller movement. So when it comes in smaller, we don't want to use that. We don't want to use that pivot root. It doesn't develop the power that we need. We want to change to the fishtail routing straight away like that. It's just this kind of traditional block, and you can see Wang Xiangjai's argument that originally it was what we call one of the natural movements, the natural Farley movements. There's a set of movements that we say are are cultural because they're much more task specific, like an uppercut or something like that. And then there's a set of movements that we say, broadly speaking, are natural. These are all big hits with the forearms, big blocky movements, hit with the shoulder. Just the kind of thing that you see in the old Yiquan, where they're doing this kind of movement. Big, massive forearm hits that catch everything, but which can also be exploited by other people who've got much more task-specific, problem-solving martial arts skills. So we need like that second category of skills, which is what we call the cultural techniques, the cultural Farley, or task-specific, problem-specific Farley, like punch, elbow, uppercut, and all kinds of fight training drills and fight practice that's very specific for specific things, rather than just intuitively big, whatever's there, I'm just going to hit with a big, it's just, that's what you can say is the real wushu of the ancients, but it's got to be combined with tactical upgrades in specific problem solving skills. Wang Shengzai himself says that. And then it applies to everything else as well, so you can even practice like other postures, particularly elbows. So like thinking very close. If you want to elbow very close range, exactly the same thing occurs. You can change the rule by making the posture bigger by moving, by leaning. If you swerve out of the way, and you can shift to a pivot route again. But again, these are like the art of the configuration really is the art. So that's like, there's no limit to how sophisticated you can get with that. That's just a few steps further down the line. You can move out of the way, just as you can with the, if you're going to do this posture, you can twist much more into it and use the pivot routing again. But if we're keeping really, really close, and we want to just say, we just want to elbow into someone's chest like that, and you can hear it setting with both feet. You can hear exactly what I mean by this posture. The fishtail routing goes out, both feet set, and I even just move forward up. See, all my energy moves forward with the, rather than try to restrain the energy. I don't know if you can see it on the camera, but I'm just shifting forward a little bit. Rather than trying to just control that and dissipate it, we just channel it all, we just go with it. Just go with it all into the target. Generate as much possible force as you possibly can. And this is what, when you get this, you'll have this, happens all the time, people come up and say, how do you get that much force from, like, you're not even moving. It's like, it's nothing. And the guy's going, and so no, actually there's an enormous amount of movement in the body. Just looks like nothing, each part of the body's just, it's like putting a couple of millimetres of fat on all over the body. Like 2 millimetres is nothing, but all added up it makes a big difference, All that power added up makes a big difference. So we can practice all of those, and we can even do things like, with an uppercut. And then the next thing, like, I can't really explain everything, like some of it's got to be experiential, but sometimes the back foot does the fishtail Farley more than the front foot. It just depends what the posture you're doing and how your intent just figures that the movement needs to, how it needs to articulate each component part of the configuration into the overall structural release of force. So by practicing different things and just thinking about, well, how do I do different punches? That then will unfold onto another concept that I've talked about before, which is what we call short power. And in essence, that just means that you start compensating for loss of power, even with fishtail route. Like I want to do something like, I want to punch to the face, but it's solid, but there's nothing there. So in this tiny little bit of space, I need to create more power and more room. So you move the shoulder back, you roll the shoulder in to create more, to get more power. It's a bit slower, but it's a compromise. But we'll come back and look at that another time, but I'll just flag that up now. Remember, it's Lego bricks building into higher and higher levels of skill. This is the science of each one. This is the real thing. The next thing we want to think about is that, as I've said, you can do it with the back foot. And this was, I've seen two really interesting things on YouTube. One is Boji Kong, and he's saying, well, I'm doing this kind of pull back Farley like this, which is a really important kind of Farley that we use all the time. And the question is how to do that. So while he's demonstrating, he says like, we always do it like round like that, round, pull back and down like that, round, and then the moment he's doing it with power, he does it just straight back like that. The feeling might be a little bit round, but he absolutely doesn't do it in the way that he says that he should do it, which is quite interesting. And I think it relates back to the thing that I started out talking about, the guy doing the push, that you've got to start. I mean, fair play to him, he's actually trying to push someone, and the moment he tries to push someone, he immediately changes to something else, because he must have been taught like that. He immediately changes to something else. So the moment you start trying to do it, it no longer works. And the moment you try and hit an object, or you try and bring it into sparring. So doing things with power, doing things with more power, educates you in itself. It changes the way that you think about things. And sometimes that's like, okay, when you do it with power, you shouldn't really do it that way. And that's kind of Boji Okonga thing. Like the moment he does it with power, it's obvious you do it straight, unless you're deliberately pulling someone down. But it's too slow and it's too awkward to do a movement like that. You just want to pull straight in and punch out, or whatever it is you want to do. Hit him with the, we'll look at that in a minute. It's too slow to do it like that. Whereas with this, you should immediately realise, that's wrong. And that's something that happens all the time. We call it transition points, and particularly happens when you try and bring things into live training. We'll talk about another time. Like you do all this training, then you come into sparring and it doesn't work, and you have that kind of moment of disappointment, like it doesn't work. And what you've got to realise is a transition point is a period of time. It's not a moment, it's a period of time. And at the beginning of that period of time, when you start doing things with more power, or hitting a bag, or doing sparring, they won't necessarily work straight away. The body's got to learn a slightly different way of doing it, because the dynamics are different when you do it with more power or in a live situation. Step by step, you transition into their ability to use the skill. Which is a very long-winded way of saying, like, just pull straight back. And like, even when I practice this, I would rarely do that. Unless I was doing it deliberately as an exercise. When I'm practicing it's always like rubbing your hands on glass on a plane like that. Anyway, the point being, like, this uses fishtail Farley. This way, I saw someone doing it this way with the fishtail Farley in, and I thought, well, this is a really interesting thing. Number one, this is what happens when, like the system isn't systematized enough for someone to just, like, you don't want it overly systematized. You want it to be an intuitive skill, but you want the system as it stands to save you time from being deviated on the things that are wrong. So this is, again, it's an example of like, do we open or do we close? And if you fishtail out like this is closing because the hips are coming close together. And if you're hitting like a pinball paddle this way, this is opening because the hips are going, and then straight away you start frog's legging. And it should, like you've got to remember that within the structural movement paradigm, they can both be right. It's just what for. So if the idea is, I want to hit in something with, if I want to hit him with the leg this way, like I want to push in like that. Let's say my opponent's leg's there and I want to hit and push that way, then that's right. But if I just want to pull them back like that, then that's wrong, and you can feel it straight away that just moves you a little bit off balance. And the way to do it is out that way, when you're just pulling straight back, fishtail out into this really strong posture, so that you can, and also you're dropping all your weight down, so that's adding into the pull down. And then you can immediately, this is storing force, so that you can spring straight back up into whatever it is that you want to do from that posture. So you can just practice quite relaxed, like everything, or you can even practice like that and feel it yourself. It's the kind of thing you would do a little bit if you were going to lift and do a high knee or something like that. I wouldn't do it like that. I'd spring up off my foot like that and do it like that. So you should do it in each one. But this, for if for some reason you want to hit in with this part of the leg, like that, you do it that way. It should be that way. It should be that way. It's very hard to, so this way, and similarly, if we want to pull, well, we don't just want like, we usually just see this in each one, to pull straight back like that, but we need some different versions of it. And actually, now that I've said that about Boji Kong, now it just occurs to me straight away that of course we do need the pull down and round like that. So that's another version, we'll come back to that in a moment. So we need pull to the side like that. And when we pull to the side, we use the fishtail route, but we can also see that the feet start to inline. And remember when I talked about this idea with the elbow, the root inlines like that. Like that. And everything twists that way. Whatever you want from that posture. And that's the rebound, that's the somatic timing on the rebound. And then for this, if we go this way, then the front foot, it's the front foot that fishtail. So back foot for straight back into the back leg, and then front foot for the pull to the other side. Like that. You can hear straight away that if I don't emphasise it, you can't hear the front foot set quite as much as you can hear the back leg set. It's just a more powerful movement, and also your weight is more on the back leg, so you just get all that. If I do that, there's not that much weight on the front leg. If I do that, all the weight's on the back leg. So you can hear, if I don't exaggerate, you can hear the back leg much more clearly. And whoa, mate, it's doing something. Not the Fayus, mate. And if we're doing the H, good boy. Sit. 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 Jump. If we're doing the, I'll give this one to Boji Yiquan. Well, I tremendously respect Boji Yiquan, I have to say. This one where you pull down this way, he doesn't do it this way, but there is definitely like versions where you want to pull it down and round on an angle like that. So they just follow exactly the same route. So rather than just straight back, which is like, you know, like you've got your hands on the guard or something like that, and somatic timing into the punch or something like that. But if we want to pull down, let's say we want to hit him with the hip or something like that, and if they're kind of leaning in a lot, or maybe even they're starting to go for the takedown or something, just try to. And for those, there's another principle that I've talked about, that the power of the movement is partially dependent on the target. So it can be the weakness of the target. So like quite a light movement, like just going like that in someone's eye, doesn't have to be a really powerful movement to cause damage. But it can also be, as Zhao Daoxin says, if they're moving towards you, that can add power into the movement. So if someone's falling towards you, like they're going for a fast takedown, and you just release force with the hip. This is used in wrestling all the time. Like college, like Greco-Roman wrestling, where they block with the hip like that rather than going for the sprawl, which can be quite dangerous in Greco-Roman wrestling. Block with the hip and then change into a posture. And one of the reasons the block works is that they go for the takedown really fast, and your opponent puts all the energy into the movement. You've only got to release a little bit of force. So we pulled it and change into the hip with them. That was a bit of rubbish. Into the, like that. I suppose I could say there is this exercise where you can do like, just fishtail like. It looks ridiculous, but it's quite a good training exercise just to practice. Because it's quite odd to drop your weight, because you're just mostly using gravity. There's the muscles that pull you down like that aren't that strong. So drop and then fishtail out with them. you end up in this kind of Yongchun stance. A bit of Yongchun there for you. I don't know Yongchun, I learnt it off the internet. In this kind of goat riding stance, and you can add in different, and it's very much like Campbell locking, me dancing, that kind of movement, only with force, and just practice the heels hitting into the wall like that, different postures, weighting it one way or the other. No, no, no. What a good boy. Shall we call that it for today? That's it for today. Thanks very much for watching. I hope that was useful. Go away and practice some of those things. I know I've got a backlog now thinking of drills for people to do some practice on. You can definitely think of some of your own. See you in the next one.